Hello, welcome to the Boulder Bookstore. I'm Arsen Kashkashian, the head buyer here, and I'm going to talk to you about some brand new books that have come out. In the very near future, you will be able to come into the store and browse for yourself. We're looking to open some point in the next week or so. So I'd love to see you here if you have the opportunity to come in. But anyway, here are the books for this week. The first book is This Is What America Looks Like by Ilhan Omar. She is the first Somali American congressperson in the United States. She was born in Somalia, and as an 8-year-old, her village had a raid, very violent, and they ended up in a refugee camp for 4 years in Kenya before she came to America as a 12-year-old. Can you imagine coming as a 12-year-old to America from that situation? Well, she graduated college, she became active in politics, and she got elected from Minnesota as a congresswoman. I think she has a lot of interesting things to say. She's the first woman to wear a hijab on the congressional floor, which was not allowed. You wouldn't have any headdress on. They had to change that rule so she could be sworn in. And so I have a lot of admiration for her. I know a couple weeks ago we talked about the Nancy Pelosi book, and so I feel like these are kind of bookends of what's going on in the Democratic Party right now, with Nancy Pelosi trying to guide the party and in all its multifaceted ways, and Omar coming in and being a fresh voice, bringing in a different worldview than the party has had in the past, and something that's much needed in diverse America. So we also have signed editions of these books. So you might want to get it, because every now and then a politician's first book becomes worth a little bit of money if it's signed. Not that Dreams of My Father did anything for Obama. Next book is Breathe by James Nestor. So I took yoga a number of years ago. I did it for maybe 3 years, and of course in yoga you talk a lot about the breathing. And I've always thought about it. If you meditate, you think about breathing. In this book, he gives us a real kind of anthropological look at where breathing has gone wrong. We breathe through our mouths a lot. It causes snoring. It causes sleep apnea. Where if you learn how to breathe correctly, it can change all sorts of things about your life. So he goes around the world and through history talking about how to breathe correctly. And this has been a big thought for me lately because I'm wearing the mask. I wear a mask probably 95% of the time that I'm in the store. About the only time I don't have the mask on is when I'm doing these, or sometimes when I'm at my desk and no one else is in the office. But the rest of the time I'm wearing the mask, and suck it in the breath, especially after you carry a basket of books upstairs. So I think this could be a very perfect book for right now. Breath. Dirt by Bill Buford. People might have read his best-selling memoir Heat a few years ago, or several years ago now. Buford worked for the New Yorker for many years. He was a fiction editor there. He's a great writer. He's also a chef. And so he wanted to be a great French chef, and he thought he could do it kind of, you know, studying for a few months under a French chef and, you know, do it in the United States for the most part, maybe go to France for a couple months. Well, he decides he can't do it that way. And so he ends up going to Lyon, and he spends 5 years there with his wife and children, and he just dives into all aspects of French cooking. So he's a fun reader. He doesn't leave anything off the page. He really puts his feelings, everything he's thinking into the book. And so it's a wonderful look of what he's going through, what French cooking is about, what life in France is like for an American family. So I would highly recommend Bill Buford's Dirt. And again, we have signed first editions here. To wrap up today, there's a few paperbacks I want to talk about. Summer's here, and a lot of times summertime reading is people reading paperbacks. And so a number of good paperbacks have come out fairly recently. A couple just this week, and one I want to talk about came out about a month or two ago in paperback. So that first one is Elizabeth Gilbert's City of Girls. I read this, and I interviewed Gilbert for the radio show, the KGNU Boulder Bookstore Radio Book Club, that airs on the fourth Thursday of every month, and we aired this show about a week ago. It was a special edition, and this book is just so much fun. She takes us back to 1940 New York City, and a 19-year-old girl, Vivian, has moved there and has moved in with her aunt who runs kind of this rundown theater. But she meets some showgirls, and Vivian ends up running around town with them until it all ends up in kind of a scandal. I don't want to give away too much of it, but Vivian is an amazing character. But even more interesting than Vivian is Gilbert's portrayal of New York City. New York comes alive as you see it through the war years and in the post-war as well. And you just can feel the streets, you can see the buildings, and the constant change of New York. How whenever anybody goes to New York, that's the New York that's seared in their mind. But the truth is that New York is constantly changing. And whenever you get there, you kind of think, this is New York, this is the best it'll ever be. But everybody thinks that, starting in this book in 1940. Inland by Thea Obrecht has just come out in paperback. This is a story set in Arizona, in the kind of the desert, very drought-stricken area. And Nora is a homesteader. It's 1893. And her husband goes off to find water for the family, and he doesn't come back. And then her two sons get in some fight, and they're gone. So Nora is out there by herself trying to survive. And so while she's out there, a guy named Laurie shows up. Laurie, it's not a true story, it's a novel, but this is based on truth. He has escaped from the United States Camel Corps. They actually had camels that they were using to explore the Arizona territory back then, because they thought the animals would be better able to navigate the desert there. The problem was those animals stunk, and so none of the other animals wanted to be anywhere near a camel, so it was very hard for them to use. But anyway, Laurie has run away from the Camel Corps, and him and Nora end up at the same place in time together. And it's just a great story of kind of the West that you don't hear so much about, this kind of very barren Arizona area. And finally, I want to tell you about a nonfiction book, David Brooks's The Second Mountain, which also came out this week in paperback. You know, Brooks is an interesting character. He writes for the New York Times. You might hear him on NPR, PBS. I don't always agree with him, but he does make me think. He recently had a column that I found very interesting about America and its individuality, and why we are particularly unable maybe to rise to the occasion of the pandemic threat. And he talked to different academics who said America has been very isolated in the sense that we're not threatened. We haven't had wars here. Pandemics in the past haven't come. And by not being threatened, we have developed this very individualism as our creed. That's what it means to be American, is to be individual. Well, that doesn't necessarily work when you have a big disaster staring at you. This book, which of course was written well before the pandemic, is really about how we find our moral centers, how we live a good life. And it's interesting because in this book, he comes up with it's our relationship to others. It's doing meaningful things with other people, with cooperation, and that all our ambitions and all our solo striving is not going to lead to that joyful life. It's going to be together. And I think that's a great message for these times. So that's David Brooks, The Second Mountain, The Quest for a Moral Life. Thank you very much.